It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Our next question comes from our friend Jess. Jess says, how do you aim your punches? That might sound like a pretty obvious question, but let's get into this. I don't mean what part of your opponent's body is the target, or what part of your hand you hit with. I'm curious as to how you actually aim your strikes to hit those targets. I am asking because my sensei invented a new form of martial arts with a method of aiming that I've never seen before. It works very well for me and his other students. I would like to compare our method of aiming with other methods of aiming. Okay, Jess. Hard to compare if I don't know what your method actually is, but it might seem like a strange thing. But you're asking a dude who's half blind how he aims his punches. Like a guy who literally has impaired vision and a big black spot in the middle, asking how he aims his punches. It's the feet, man. It is the footwork. One of the most misunderstood terms in fighting. Often when you say the term footwork, that guy has good footwork, people think you're talking about, pretty movement with the feet, dancing about, being up on the balls of the feet, prancing about a boxing ring, doing useless shuffle steps that don't actually matter at times where there's no reason to be doing them. That's not what footwork means. Footwork is putting your feet in the correct position relative to your opponent's feet in order to hit him, particularly in effective ways that will hurt him. That's what footwork means. So you're going to aim with your footwork. Now, you can look at a target and think, I'm going to hit him in the chin with my fist. And you can practice hitting a specific target in a specific place many, many times before you step in the ring with a guy with the intention of hitting him in the chin with your fist. But if your feet are not in the correct position relative to his feet, when you throw that punch, you will never, ever, ever connect that punch with your fist to his chin. If you stand in front of a stationary target, and I were to draw a bullseye on that stationary target, and I said, punch that bullseye, a child can do that without any additional training. That's not what's difficult about aiming. Although occasionally, you asked about punching, but I'm going to talk about kicking. Okay, some people have difficulty aiming a leg kick, a low kick in particular. Because you'll tell them kick the mid-thigh and they end up kicking the hip or kicking the shin. And sometimes it's a depth perception problem, and so it often helps to aim a little bit lower than you are actually thinking, and so you end up hitting the right spot by overcorrection. But as far as punching, it's pretty easy to land a punch on a stationary target. Unfortunately, in a fight, we're not fighting a stationary target with a big bullseye on it. So if a half-blind guy can hit a moving target fairly consistently on a point as small as the side of the chin, how does that aiming process work? The footwork. Move relative to how the other guy moves. Man, do you remember that big battle between Carthage and Rome? The one where Hannibal had that tremendous victory over, I'm forgetting the Roman general's name, but it was such a serious battle that something like 20% of the adult male population of Rome died in that battle alone. I'm not talking about the war, but the single battle. A huge, huge amount of Roman soldiers were just absolutely slaughtered. This was such a tremendous victory historically, like there's been nothing else like it. as far as how much of a landslide it was over one of the most well-trained, well-equipped armies that the ancient world had ever seen in Rome. So how did Hannibal do it? And he did it with a much, much smaller force, too. There were like 3-4 times as many Romans as there were Carthaginians. And it's a crazy thing. But the Carthaginians kind of lined up in a big long line, and they had their cavalry, the guys on horseback on the ends, right? And the Romans lined up in their legions and marched forward and felt pretty confident in their heavy infantry that they would prevail. And so they come forward. The cavalry rides out at the flanks as they generally do, and they engage with the Romans. And the Carthaginians have some success with their cavalry because they put more stock in cavalry than the Romans did. The Romans put all their stock in the heavy infantry in the center because that's traditionally how they won their battles. And then the front lines collide, right? We have the Romans here, the Carthaginians here, and then the flanks coming up the side, right? And the Carthaginians did something brilliant. They had the center start to retreat, start to move back, shields facing forward, of course, but the center starts moving back, which gave the Romans courage to move forward. They're moving back, we're winning, and they move forward. Meanwhile, the Carthaginian flanks are coming up on the side, and the cavalry is riding behind. And what are they doing? They're walling them in. They're creating a box around the Romans. And so with a much smaller military force, the Romans are completely surrounded at this point because they took the bait. They moved in. The Carthaginians faded back. The Romans moved forward. They took the bait. They fell into the trap. They got surrounded and crushed. Very few survivors. So what does that have to do with boxing? Man, everything to do with boxing. That represents the most basic strategy to win at boxing. To win in the art of punching another guy in the face and ending the fight properly. How so? Well, generally, we have two guys squared up, and if we throw a legitimate threat at him, here comes a punch that might hurt you, generally he's going to move away from it. So we give him a little bait, a little incentive to move forward. We move that front line back, shields forward, of course. So he follows, he becomes encouraged, and as he's coming forward, we move around the side and flank him, boom, check hook, or switch step, boom, uppercut, hook. On that other side, we do some type of pivot to get on the side and flank him and surround him and beat him where he is not well defended. And everything about that is dependent on correct footwork, meaning your feet move relative to his feet. You program him to move a certain way. You move this way, he moves that way, because it's human instinct to move away from danger. You move back, he moves forward, because it's human instinct to move forward when you feel like you're winning. And so as he's moving forward, you already know the direction he's going to be moving. So what do? He moves forward. We're like a bullfighter. We're like Carthage. We're like, boom. Flank him. Dead. So how do you aim? Draw up that battle plan in your head first. I love looking at and studying old military formations from ancient warfare, from pre-firearm civilizations. It's fascinating. I'm so fascinated by Shaka Zulu and the bull formation that he used. It was importantly different than the one the Carthaginians used, and it's a strategy I find works really well when you adapt it to amateur boxing as opposed to professionals. When you're a professional, you gotta think more like Hannibal, but as far as amateur goes, yeah, working like Shaka Zulu works wonders. Here's how the bull formation was different. It was pretty straightforward. The first line, those are basically the new guys who didn't really know what they were doing, not a lot of experience, not the best soldiers. And so the new guys would come in and clash with the other army, and you have to keep in mind Shaka Zulu was basically probably the first guy in the southern part of the continent of Africa who actually had an intelligent, well thought out military formation plan for his armies. And man, that's how he conquered such a vast swath of the continent. Meanwhile, he's fighting against, these guys in, fairly small tribes, not particularly organized. Melee combat before Shaka Zulu was basically people would have long spears. The Zulu didn't use long spears. They used a short spear. They cut the handle off. And this is quite interesting. This is so fascinating to me. Because mechanically, a long spear is a far superior weapon to a short spear. But the Zulu did so much more effectively with the short spears than the long ones. Why is that? Because he understood human psychology. You give an army of people who are defending their homeland a bunch of long spears, long pointy spears. What are they going to do? Against another army of guys with long pointy spears, they point those spears at each other. They keep as much mechanical distance between them and their opponents as possible. Not a lot of people die because nobody really gets close. They try to scare the other side. They try to scare them away. Go away, get off our land. Stay on your own side. And eventually one side relents, retreats. Sometimes they'll poke them in the back as they run. That's where most of the killing traditionally took place, in these old-timey battles. When one side gave up and turned around, that's when the killing piled up. But for the most part, they were fairly bloodless affairs. And Shaka Zulu understood that, so he chopped the handles off the spears. And so the Zulu spear were about that long, the head and a handle, kind of like a short sword. There was only one thing you could do with it: get up close and personal and stab people to death with them. You couldn't play it safe from a distance. He didn't want his armies to play it safe from a distance. He wanted them to kill the enemy and conquer. And boy, did he ever. So the Zulu bull formation, they'd have the new guys in the front. They would meet the other army. Their purpose was to tire them out a little bit. That was the head of the bull. And behind the head was the body of the bull. More experienced soldiers, a larger force of them, to come in and relieve the new guys and give a good pounding to the other side after they had already tired out a little bit fighting the new guys. And meanwhile, they've got the horns, the flanks. While they're busy fighting the guys in the middle, the flanks run up, surround them, box them in, kind of like what Carthage did, but without having to retreat to get the forces to run back. And then the tail of the bull, or the loins of the bull. I'm not sure what's the correct translation. I'm going to call it the tail. The tail end of the bull, that's the last part of the army. These are the most experienced veteran soldiers who fight the best, and they come up and clean up whatever's left. And it's a really simple formation, but man, was it ever effective. I mean, imagine conquering as much territory as Shaka Zulu did without ever having to change your battle strategy. But that's relative to amateur boxing, because in amateur boxing you got 3 short rounds to land as many punches as you possibly can. And first-time fighters have very different mentalities than experienced professionals. And first-time fighters are super predictable, in very much the same sense that these amateur warriors, if you will, from these tribes that Shaka Zulu conquered, were predictable. Shaka understood exactly how they would respond to his bull formation when he closed them in and beat them up. He understood the superiority, the psychological superiority of his weapons, the short spear, over the mechanical superiority of the long spear, because he understood the mindset of his enemy. So you can fight a guy who is mechanically superior to you, but if it's his first time fighting, and you have a seasoned professional in your corner giving you the correct battle strategy to box him into that corner and beat the living daylights out of him in such a way that he does not understand what is happening to him, and how to defend himself intelligently, you win. And you win consistently. I've seen this many times. Many, many times. There was an event, an amateur event, a boxing event that my students were invited to from another gym across town. And they were exclusively a boxing gym. And my gym was an MMA gym. And these were my MMA students. Not boxing students, I do teach boxing classes, but my MMA students. And I think the assumption was that they were going to teach us a lesson. Because we weren't boxers, and they were. 6 of my fighters went over there and outboxed 6 of their boxers. 6 victories, 0 losses. Coincidence? No. Heck no. How do we aim? We aim before we ever get in the ring. We create that battle strategy. That fist has already connected to the side of the jaw before we ever step in the ring. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train.